All right. So next, I see a question in the chat there. It says, do I recommend using H.264 or exporting at a higher rate and convert in another application? So that's an excellent question and kind of tricky. So let me show you the way that I understand the question, and feel free to jump in the chat and correct me if I have anything wrong. But let's say I'm finished with this project. Right, I've got all my clips together. I'm ready to share it. So you're going to go up to the share menu at the top right, and you get a list of shared destinations. So one of these options, and probably the most common in my opinion, is to share it as a master file. So I'm going to select master file, and this brings up some of the options. I see the tags and the label and all that good stuff. But if you go into the settings tab here, you can see a couple options. We have the format, which simply means, are we sharing this for video and audio? Because you could just share the video or just the audio if you want a soundtrack. Or there's some publishing options, and this allows you to share and upload at the same time. But in this case, I'm just going to master it. I want to send out both video and audio, which is the most common. But then the second option here is a video codec. And the codec is it's how it's encoding your video. So you can think of it like a compressor, and a decompressor is what it is technically, but think about it like language. So if I'm speaking English and you're listening to me in English, then there's been no compression at all. We're listening at the same, kind of on the same level. So that's where you're going to keep it as source. Source says whatever you're hearing, whatever you're seeing, try to keep it at that same format and resolution there. So that's what source is. Now we could change this to a different codec, which we have a couple here, and there's probably thousands, if not tens of thousands of different codecs or more out there used for all kinds of different things. And very common one is Apple ProRes, which Apple designed a few years ago and is implemented here. And there's different flavors of ProRes. We can see a most kind of the generic one, or the original one, which is Apple ProRes 422. And there's also a really high quality one, which is Apple ProRes 4x4 or 4444. And there's a white paper that Apple has on all of this that explains the technical details behind why you'd want to use any one of these different options here. But there's also H.264. And I'm not going to go into the technical reasons behind all of this, but before I change it, notice at the bottom, it gives you a summary of what you're about to export. Specifically on the right side here, it shows us the estimated size, about 4 gigabytes. And if I hover over this little computer sign, this is one of my favorite features that gets overlooked. This shows us the compatibility of this file with a variety of different other devices, from iPhones to PCs, all of that stuff. And right now, the only thing that's checked off is a Mac. If we share it right now, it's sharing it out as the source, which is Apple ProRes, and that, for all intensive purposes, is really only compatible on a Mac. You can play it on other machines, but in this case, it's just a Mac. So if I don't want this, you do have an option for H.264, which is a much, much more compressed file. Instead of 4 gigabytes, we're down to about half a gigabyte at about 589 megabytes. So H.264 is way more compressed. It's a much smaller file, but it is way more compatible with other devices. So this is something that can play back all over the place. Now you can go back and do uncompressed. If we do uncompressed 10-bit, for example, notice this file is 35 gigabytes in size. That's massive, massive file. So why would you want to choose or differentiate between these various codecs? And going back to the question that's in the chat there. So do I recommend using H.264 for exporting at a higher rate? So H.264 is very compressed. I only recommend, for the most part, using this for sharing. You should not use this for mastering. You should not use this as a way to archive or save your project. And if you think you're going to be editing it later, by going to H.264, you're really compressing and lowering the quality of this video. Now, you may visually not see this because H.264 looks really nice. I mean, that's why it's there. It's a great codec, but it's designed for sending and sharing out to the world. So this is what I would use to send a project to a client, for example. Say I've edited their wedding video and I'm done with it. I want to share it to them. I might use H.264 as a way to send it over to it because it's a small file. It'd be easier to upload to the web, transfer, and send it to them. So do I recommend using H.264? Yes, definitely, unless you plan to edit and work on your project later. Now, the question does say, do I recommend exporting it and converting it in another application? And you bring up using Compressor there as well. So if you're going to take this file that you export and use a different application to compress it or change it in any way, if you use Final Cut to send it out as H.264, you're kind of squishing that file in Final Cut, and then wherever you take it, it's already squished, and you're telling that other project to also, or that other program maybe to compress it even more or change it. So I don't usually recommend sending, a compressed file to another application to then change it or compress it further. Really, whatever application you're going to use, in most cases, it's nice to keep the full quality. So in all of this, the asterisk on it is everyone's situation and their workflows are different. So there's, if you're going to put in the comments, there's reasons to do it. There totally are, but it just depends on the steps you're using. So that goes down to Compressor. So if you're using Compressor, there's actually an option when you go to share your project to send it to Compressor. And if you don't see it in the list here, it's not a default option. You can go down and click on Add Destination. And then on the left or on the right here, there's a Compressor settings. And we'll just drag this over to the left to add it as a destination. I want to save this. And then you'll see a whole list of various compressor settings that you can use. And I'm not going to go into details for Compressor. There's other videos you can use to learn that. But as far as sharing to, say, Facebook there, that's a very similar to sharing to YouTube or Vimeo. You can go on and get a video sharing service, for example. Use one of the built-in ones. Let's use 1080. I'll hit OK. So now I have a compressor setting for 1080, and you can use Compressor to, if you hit change, you can go and edit that in Compressor, but then that'll let you share using that compressor setting, right? And you can send it right from here. Or you can skip all those steps if you don't really know what you want us to export it as. You can go File, Send to Compressor, and what this will do is open up the Compressor app, which is on my other screen, so let me move that over. And here we are in Compressor, and then you get all the same options we were just seeing, but you can go through and customize these even further. So if I was using HD 1080p, I could drag that onto my source here, and then on the right side in the inspector, very similar to how Final Cut has an inspector, in the inspector here, you can go up to the video tab, and you get so many more options, which is great for how you change and customize this. So with all of this, do I recommend using H.264, for example? Well, that's just the codec. There's actually a ton of other settings that go into how you create videos and what is the actual setting you may want to use. So if you know Compressor, if you have it, you can dig down even deeper into how you choose your settings and what you set there. So that's kind of an overview of all that stuff. It gets really, really complex when you are compressing and changing videos. And a lot of times people ask me, what settings should I use? And they want the one-word answer, just click this button and it's going to do it for you. But the further you dig into this, there is such a science behind all of this that it just depends on how deep you want to get. So for all of it, though, the general kind of rule of thumb with all this, with compressing it, is the minute you export something at a lower resolution or a lower quality, you're going downhill and you can't go up. Once it gets lower in quality, you can't really get better quality back out of it. Now, it can be debated a little bit, but in general, if you have a higher quality video, don't compress it down to something low like H.264, and and send it over another application. Just try to keep that resolution as high as you can all the way through. And if you have your own workflow that you're trying to build and you want me to kind of dig into it a little bit more and give you some tips, don't hesitate. Send me an email. finalcutprohelp@me.com is the address, or send me a direct message on Instagram. Just follow us at finalcutprohelp, and I'd be happy to give you some pointers and tips on there. All right, moving back to the final segment here that I had. We have something new, which I'm excited about, called the Final Cut Gym. And we're going to try this out and see how this segment works.